Meet Karen, the HOA queen who thought she could park anywhere, even in a black man's driveway. She ignored his pleas, dismissed his rights, and thought she was untouchable. But Reggie Carter had other plans. Watch how one man's stand against entitlement turned an entire neighborhood around in this inspiring, real-life story of justice. Reggie Carter, a 38-year-old software engineer, had always dreamed of owning a home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. After years of saving, he purchased a modest two-story house in Oakwood Estates, a tidy community in a mid-size American city known for its tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns. For Reggie, a black man who grew up in a bustling urban apartment, this move represented more than just a new address. It was a milestone, a symbol of stability and success. He envisioned weekend barbecues, a small garden in the backyard, and a peaceful life where he could recharge after long workdays. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first glance. Families walked their dogs, kids rode bikes, and neighbors exchanged friendly waves. But beneath the surface of this idyllic setting, a subtle tension was brewing, one that would soon disrupt Reggie's hopes for a tranquil new chapter. The trouble began with Karen Mitchell, a middle-aged woman who lived 3 houses down from Reggie. Karen was a self-appointed gatekeeper of Oakwood Estates, known for her meticulous attention to HOA rules and her habit of scrutinizing everyone's compliance. She had a reputation for being particular. Neighbors whispered about her complaints over unshoveled sidewalks or unapproved mailbox designs, but most dismissed her as harmless, if annoying. Reggie, unaware of her notoriety, first noticed her car, a silver SUV, parked in his driveway one Saturday morning. He assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps a visitor had misjudged the address, or Karen had parked there temporarily. He didn't think much of it and left a polite note on her windshield. "Hi, I think you parked in my driveway by mistake. Please let me know if you need to discuss. Reggie, 214 Oakwood Lane." The next day, the SUV was back, blocking half his driveway. Reggie couldn't pull his car out without risking a scrape. He checked the street. There were plenty of open spots, including in front of Karen's own house. Puzzled, he knocked on her door to clarify. Karen answered, her expression curt. "Oh, that's my car," she said, as if it were obvious. "I needed extra space for my guests." Reggie, keeping his tone friendly, explained that the driveway was his only parking spot and asked her to move. Karen shrugged, promised to look into it, and closed the door. The car stayed put for hours. Over the next week, the pattern continued. Karen's SUV appeared in Reggie's driveway 2 more times, each instance more brazen. One evening, it was parked diagonally, taking up the entire space. Reggie left another note, this time firmer, "Please stop parking in my driveway. This is private property." The note vanished, but the car remained. He tried knocking again, but Karen didn't answer. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Alvarez, who lived across the street, caught Reggie's eye one morning and shook her head sympathetically. "That's just Karen being Karen," she said. "She thinks she runs this place." Reggie started to sense something deeper at play. Karen's dismissiveness wasn't just about parking, it felt personal. He'd wave to her on morning jogs, but she'd look through him. Other neighbors were warm, inviting him to a block party or chatting about local restaurants, but Karen's interactions were cold, clipped, and evasive. Reggie wondered if race played a role. He'd experienced subtle slights before, store clerks following him too closely, strangers clutching purses as he passed, but he hoped a neighborhood like Oakwood would be different. Yet Karen's refusal to acknowledge his requests, coupled with her cavalier attitude, suggested she didn't see him as an equal neighbor deserving of basic respect. The situation escalated when Reggie found Karen's SUV in his driveway on a Friday night, blocking him from leaving for a friend's birthday dinner. He called her phone, having gotten her number from the HOA directory, but it went to voicemail. Frustrated, he walked to her house again. This time, Karen's husband answered, looking embarrassed. "I'll tell her to move it," he mumbled, but the car stayed put until the next morning. Reggie missed the dinner. The next day, he saw Karen in her front yard and approached her one last time. "Karen, I need you to stop parking in my driveway," he said calmly. "It's my property, and I can't use it when your car's there." Karen rolled her eyes. "It's just a driveway," she said. "Don't make a big deal out of it." Her tone carried a hint of condescension, as if Reggie's concerns were trivial. By now, Reggie realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. Karen believed she was entitled to his space. Her actions weren't just inconvenient, they were disrespectful, challenging his right to his own property. The neighborhood, once a symbol of peace, was becoming a battleground. Reggie didn't want conflict, but he knew he couldn't let this continue. He started researching his options, from HOA bylaws to local towing laws, determined to reclaim his space. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a larger showdown that would expose Karen's true character and rally the community in ways he never expected. Reggie Carter's attempts to resolve the driveway issue with Karen Mitchell were met with indifference, but the situation soon escalated beyond occasional inconvenience. Karen's behavior transformed from careless to calculated, her actions revealing a deep-seated sense of entitlement that left Reggie questioning her motives. What began as a neighborly dispute over parking was turning into a daily affront, with Karen treating Reggie's property as an extension of her own domain. Her disregard for his requests, coupled with her dismissive attitude, suggested she believed she held a higher claim to the neighborhood's rules and spaces. As the weeks passed, her arrogance became impossible to ignore, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose the cracks in Oakwood Estates' seemingly harmonious community. Karen's silver SUV appeared in Reggie's driveway almost every day now, often parked at angles that made it clear she wasn't just misjudging the space. On one occasion, her car was positioned so close to his garage door that he couldn't open it without risking damage. Reggie's notes, once polite, then firm, went unanswered, either torn off her windshield or left crumpled on his lawn. He tried catching her in person, but Karen dodged him, either not answering her door or hurrying inside when she saw him approaching. When he finally caught her one morning as she retrieved her mail, her response was chillingly nonchalant. "I've lived here longer," she said, barely looking up. "I do what I want." The words carried a weight that went beyond parking. They implied she saw herself above Reggie, as if his ownership of his home was less legitimate than her presence in the neighborhood. Her entitlement extended beyond the driveway. Karen began to act as if Reggie's entire property was subject to her approval. She'd linger near his front yard, eyeing his flower beds or mailbox with a critical gaze, occasionally muttering about standards loud enough for him to hear. Neighbors started sharing stories of Karen's history. She'd once reported a family for planting non-approved shrubs, citing HOA guidelines, and hounded another resident over a basketball hoop until they removed it. But with Reggie, her behavior seemed sharper, more personal. He couldn't shake the feeling that race played a part. Karen's interactions with other neighbors, mostly white, were curt but civil, often laced with a forced smile. With Reggie, she was openly dismissive, her tone suggesting he was an outsider who didn't belong. The situation grew untenable when Karen began using Reggie's driveway to accommodate her guests. During a weekend barbecue at her house, 3 cars filled his driveway, none of them hers. When Reggie approached her to ask why, she waved him off. "It's just for a few hours," she said, as if his inconvenience was irrelevant. "You don't even use your driveway that much." The assumption stung. Reggie worked long hours and often parked in his garage, but that didn't mean his property was up for grabs. He pointed out that he needed access for deliveries and emergencies, but Karen cut him off. "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped, turning back to her guests. The dismissal was public, witnessed by a few neighbors who exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Reggie began documenting the incidents, taking photos of Karen's car and noting dates and times. He reached out to the HOA, hoping they could mediate. The response was lukewarm. The HOA president, a mild-mannered retiree, suggested Reggie work it out with Karen directly, citing her long-standing role as a vocal member of the community. This only emboldened Karen. She started parking her SUV in his driveway overnight, sometimes leaving it there for entire weekends. Once, Reggie found a sticky note on his door, "Stop whining about the driveway. It's not a big deal." The note wasn't signed, but the handwriting matched the HOA complaints Karen had filed against others. The neighborhood began to feel divided. Some residents, like Mrs. Alvarez, expressed sympathy for Reggie, whispering about Karen's overreach. Others stayed silent, wary of crossing her. Karen's influence stemmed from her relentless involvement in HOA meetings, where she positioned herself as the arbiter of community standards. Her entitlement wasn't just about parking, it was about control, about asserting dominance in a space she believed she owned more than anyone else. For Reggie, a black man who'd worked tirelessly to claim his piece of the American dream, her actions felt like a challenge to his very presence in Oakwood Estates. He wasn't just fighting for his driveway, he was fighting for his right to belong. As Karen's arrogance grew, Reggie knew he had to act decisively, or her behavior would only worsen, threatening the peace he'd sought in his new home. Reggie Carter's patience had worn thin. Karen Mitchell's relentless parking in his driveway had escalated from an annoyance to a daily violation of his property rights. Her dismissive attitude, coupled with her refusal to acknowledge his requests, pushed him to a breaking point. Polite notes, face-to-face conversations, and appeals to the HOA had yielded nothing but Karen's smug entitlement. Reggie, a man who valued peace and preferred to avoid conflict, realized that reasoning with her was futile. Her actions weren't just about convenience. They were a power play, a challenge to his place in Oakwood Estates. Determined to reclaim his space, Reggie decided to take decisive action. The first tow of Karen's silver SUV would mark a turning point, sending ripples through the neighborhood and exposing the fault lines of privilege and accountability. By now, Karen's parking had become a predictable routine. Her SUV appeared in Reggie's driveway at least 4 times a week, often blocking his access to his garage or forcing him to park on the street. The audacity peaked one Tuesday evening when Reggie returned from a 12-hour workday to find Karen's car parked diagonally across his driveway, leaving no room for his own vehicle. He had a critical work meeting the next morning, requiring an early start, and the prospect of dealing with Karen's obstruction yet again was infuriating. Reggie checked the street. Empty spots abounded, including directly in front of Karen's house. Her choice to park in his driveway was deliberate, a statement of dominance rather than necessity. That night, Reggie made a decision. He would no longer tolerate her disregard. He researched local towing laws and confirmed that, as the homeowner, he had the right to remove unauthorized vehicles from his private property. Reggie contacted a local towing company, explaining the situation and providing photos of Karen's SUV, complete with timestamps showing its repeated presence. The tow company agreed to act swiftly. The next morning, as Karen's car sat in his driveway yet again, Reggie made the call. Within an hour, a tow truck arrived, hooked up the silver SUV, and hauled it away to an impound lot a few miles away. Reggie watched from his porch, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over him. He didn't want to escalate tensions, but Karen had left him no choice. The tow would cost her a hefty fee, around $200, plus daily storage charges, and Reggie hoped it would finally send a message. Word spread quickly through Oakwood Estates. By noon, neighbors were whispering about the tow. Mrs. Alvarez, who had long sympathized with Reggie, gave him a discreet nod of approval as she watered her plants. Others, however, were less certain. Karen had cultivated a network of allies through her HOA involvement, and some residents viewed Reggie's action as aggressive. A few approached him cautiously, asking if he'd tried talking it out with Karen first. Reggie explained the months of ignored notes and confrontations, but the skepticism in their eyes hinted at Karen's influence. She had a knack for framing herself as the victim, and Reggie braced for her retaliation. Karen's reaction was swift and predictable. That afternoon, she stormed to the impound lot, paid the fee, and retrieved her SUV. By evening, she was at Reggie's doorstep, her face flushed with anger. She accused him of overreacting, claiming the driveway was just a shared space, and that he'd embarrassed her in front of the neighborhood. Reggie stood firm, calmly explaining that the driveway was his property, not a communal lot, and that her repeated parking had forced his hand. Karen scoffed, muttering about newcomers disrupting the community, a comment that carried an unmistakable edge. Reggie didn't take the bait, but her words confirmed his suspicions. Her entitlement was tinged with prejudice, a belief that he didn't belong in Oakwood Estates. The tow didn't deter Karen as Reggie had hoped. Within days, her SUV was back in his driveway, parked defiantly in the center. It was as if the financial sting and public humiliation meant nothing to her. Worse, she began spreading her version of events, telling neighbors that Reggie was causing trouble and targeting her for no reason. She painted herself as a victim of an overzealous newcomer, conveniently omitting her months of trespassing. Some neighbors bought into her narrative, wary of Reggie's assertiveness, while others began to see through her facade. The tow had drawn a line in the sand, exposing Karen's refusal to respect boundaries and igniting a broader conversation about fairness in the community. For Reggie, it was a small victory, but he knew the fight was far from over. Karen's arrogance hadn't wavered, and her next moves would test his resolve further. The towing of Karen Mitchell's SUV from Reggie Carter's driveway sent a clear message, but instead of backing off, Karen doubled down with a vengeance. Her entitlement, bruised by the public embarrassment and financial hit of the tow, fueled a campaign of retaliation that turned Oakwood Estates into a battleground. Reggie had hoped the tow would force Karen to respect his property, but her response was a calculated escalation, leveraging her influence in the neighborhood and the HOA to paint him as the aggressor. Her tactics were petty, manipulative, and relentless, revealing a deeper prejudice that made Reggie's fight for his rights feel like a stand against something much larger. As Karen weaponized the system against him, Reggie faced mounting pressure, but his resolve only grew stronger. Karen's first move was to flood the HOA with complaints about Reggie's property. Within days of the tow, he received a letter citing violations. His lawn was unkempt, his mailbox was non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetics, and his dog, a friendly golden retriever named Max, was allegedly a nuisance for barking. Reggie was stunned. His lawn was mowed weekly, his mailbox matched the standard design, and Max rarely barked, spending most days indoors. Neighbors confirmed they hadn't heard excessive barking, and Mrs. Alvarez, who often petted Max, called the complaint absurd. It was clear Karen was behind the reports, using her clout as a longtime HOA member to bury Reggie in bureaucratic harassment. Each complaint required a response, forcing Reggie to spend hours photographing his property and drafting rebuttals to prove compliance. Karen didn't stop there. She began calling the neighborhood's private security patrol, reporting Reggie for suspicious behavior on his own property. One evening, as he took out his trash, a security guard approached, asking for ID and questioning why he was loitering. Reggie explained he was at his own home, but the guard's skepticism left him shaken. Another night, Karen reported a strange vehicle in Reggie's driveway, his own car, which he occasionally parked outside. These calls were humiliating, designed to make Reggie feel like an outsider in his own neighborhood. He began to notice neighbors glancing at him warily, some influenced by Karen's whispers that he was trouble. Her tactics were working, sowing doubt and isolating Reggie in a community he'd hoped to call home. Her campaign extended to social manipulation. Karen hosted coffee gatherings for select neighbors, where she spun a narrative of victimhood. She claimed Reggie had targeted her with a tow out of spite, conveniently omitting her months of parking in his driveway. She portrayed herself as a pillar of the community under attack by a disruptive newcomer. Some neighbors, wary of her influence, nodded along, while others, like Mrs. Alvarez and a young couple down the street, saw through her act. Karen's stories grew bolder. She hinted that Reggie's presence lowered property values, a dog whistle comment that carried racial undertones. Reggie heard these rumors secondhand, each one a sting that confirmed his suspicions about her motives. Her actions weren't just about the driveway. They were about asserting dominance over someone she viewed as less entitled to belong in Oakwood Estates. Karen's dirty tactics also included passive-aggressive stabs. She left anonymous notes in Reggie's mailbox, one reading, "Learn to be a better neighbor," another warning, "You're making enemies here." Reggie suspected her handwriting, which matched earlier HOA complaints. She also encouraged her allies to scrutinize his property, leading to a neighbor reporting his recycling bin for being too visible on pickup day. The constant harassment was exhausting, draining Reggie's energy as he balanced work and defending himself against baseless accusations. He documented every incident, from security calls to HOA letters, building a case to protect himself. Yet the emotional toll was real. He felt targeted, not just for his driveway but for who he was. The neighborhood began to fracture. Some residents, swayed by Karen's influence, distanced themselves from Reggie, while others rallied quietly in his favor. Mrs. Alvarez shared stories of Karen's past bullying, like when she'd pressured a single mother to repaint her house over a minor shade violation. The young couple, new to the neighborhood like Reggie, confided they'd also faced Karen's nitpicking. These allies gave Reggie hope, but Karen's relentless attacks tested his patience. Her retaliation wasn't just personal, it was a power play, a bid to maintain control over a community she saw as hers to rule. Reggie knew he couldn't let her win, but her tactics were escalating, and he braced for what she'd do next, determined to stand his ground against her vindictive crusade. Karen Mitchell's retaliation against Reggie Carter had turned Oakwood Estates into a tense battleground, but her refusal to respect his property rights only intensified after the first tow. Despite the financial sting and public embarrassment of having her SUV hauled away, Karen remained undeterred, her entitlement unshaken. Reggie had hoped the tow would force her to reconsider her actions, but instead, she doubled down, parking in his driveway with even greater defiance. Her persistence pushed Reggie to take action once more, resulting in a second tow that escalated their conflict and exposed her true character to the neighborhood. The incident not only deepened the divide in Oakwood Estates but also marked a turning point, as Karen's outburst began to unravel her carefully crafted image. Less than a week after the first tow, Karen's silver SUV reappeared in Reggie's driveway, parked squarely in the center as if to taunt him. The audacity was staggering. She hadn't even attempted to park elsewhere, despite ample street spaces and her own driveway nearby. Reggie, exhausted from her ongoing harassment through HOA complaints and security calls, saw this as a deliberate challenge. He'd already spent hours defending himself against her baseless accusations, from lawn maintenance to alleged dog barking, and now she was escalating the original offense. Karen's actions suggested she believed she was untouchable, that her status in the neighborhood gave her a free pass to disregard Reggie's rights. The second tow became inevitable when, 2 days later, her SUV blocked his driveway again, preventing him from leaving for a weekend errand. Reggie contacted the same towing company, providing updated photos and a detailed log of Karen's repeated trespassing. He confirmed with the HOA that his driveway was private property, ensuring he was within his rights. The tow truck arrived swiftly, and Karen's SUV was removed once more, this time racking up another $250 in fees, including towing and impound costs. Reggie felt a mix of resolve and frustration. He didn't want to keep towing her car, but Karen's refusal to compromise left him no choice. He braced for her reaction, knowing her previous retaliation had been fierce, but he also hoped this second tow might finally break through her arrogance. Karen's response was explosive. She retrieved her car from the impound lot and, that same evening, confronted Reggie in front of his house. The confrontation drew neighbors' attention, with several peering from windows or lingering on their porches. Karen's voice carried across the street as she accused Reggie of harassment, claiming he was targeting her for no reason. She called him unreasonable and disrespectful, words that rang hollow given her months of trespassing. Reggie remained calm, explaining that he'd asked her repeatedly to stop parking in his driveway, but she interrupted, dismissing his claims as exaggerations. Her tirade included veiled racial jabs, referring to him as that kind of neighbor who doesn't understand community. The outburst was a spectacle, but it backfired. Her aggression and refusal to take accountability alienated those watching. The neighborhood's reaction began to shift. Mrs. Alvarez, who had long supported Reggie, later told him she was appalled by Karen's behavior, noting that her outburst revealed a side many hadn't seen so publicly. The young couple down the street, who had faced Karen's nitpicking themselves, began speaking openly about her bullying tactics. Even some of Karen's allies seemed uncomfortable, their silence during her tirade signaling doubt. Karen's attempt to paint Reggie as the aggressor fell flat. Her refusal to acknowledge her wrongdoing was too blatant, and the second tow underscored her inability to learn from consequences. Neighbors started whispering about her pattern of entitlement, recalling past incidents where she'd strong-armed others over minor issues like fence heights or holiday decorations. Karen's credibility took a hit, but she didn't relent. She doubled down on her narrative, telling anyone who would listen that Reggie was destroying the neighborhood's harmony. She filed another HOA complaint, this time claiming his towing actions were hostile and violated community standards. The complaint was quickly dismissed. The HOA bylaws clearly supported Reggie's right to protect his property, but her persistence showed she was more interested in control than resolution. The second tow had exposed her not just as entitled but as vindictive, willing to escalate a losing battle rather than admit fault. For Reggie, the incident was bittersweet. He'd reclaimed his driveway again, but the cost was a neighborhood divided and a personal toll from Karen's relentless attacks. Yet the cracks in her influence were growing, and Reggie sensed the tide turning as more neighbors began to see her actions for what they were, a desperate bid to maintain power at the expense of fairness. The second tow of Karen Mitchell's SUV marked a pivotal moment in Oakwood Estates, as Reggie Carter's stand against her entitlement began to reshape the neighborhood's dynamics. Karen's public outburst, laced with accusations and thinly veiled prejudice, exposed her true character to many who had previously tolerated her overbearing behavior. Her relentless parking in Reggie's driveway, followed by her aggressive retaliation through HOA complaints and security calls, had pushed the community to a tipping point. Neighbors who had once stayed silent or aligned with Karen out of habit or fear began to reconsider their positions. Reggie's calm resolve and undeniable right to his property contrasted sharply with Karen's vindictive tactics, prompting a shift in allegiances that fractured her influence and rallied support for Reggie's cause. The neighborhood's response was not immediate but grew steadily as Karen's actions became harder to ignore. Mrs. Alvarez, a long-time resident who had quietly supported Reggie from the start, became more vocal, sharing her disgust at Karen's behavior with others. She recounted how Karen had once harassed her over a minor fence violation, pressuring her to repaint it at her own expense. Mrs. Alvarez's stories resonated with others who had endured Karen's nitpicking, from complaints about holiday lights to demands for approved garden plants. Her credibility as a respected elder in Oakwood Estates gave weight to her words, encouraging others to speak up. The young couple down the street, who had moved in around the same time as Reggie, also began sharing their experiences, noting how Karen had criticized their patio furniture as tacky and reported them for a temporary sign welcoming their newborn. These shared grievances revealed a pattern. Karen's entitlement wasn't just directed at Reggie but was a long-standing tactic to control the neighborhood. Reggie's approach, measured, documented, and rooted in his legal rights, earned him quiet admiration. Unlike Karen, who relied on manipulation and loud confrontations, Reggie handled the conflict with dignity, refusing to stoop to her level. He continued to greet neighbors warmly, mow his lawn, and walk his dog Max, maintaining a sense of normalcy despite the tension. This steadiness won over residents who had initially been swayed by Karen's narrative of victimhood. A middle-aged couple across the street, who had once nodded along to Karen's complaints, approached Reggie to apologize for their earlier distance, admitting they'd been misled by her version of events. They admired his patience and began checking in on him, offering to corroborate his account if the HOA pursued Karen's latest complaints. This small gesture signaled a broader shift. The community was starting to see Reggie not as a troublemaker, but as someone standing up for fairness. Not all neighbors sided with Reggie immediately. Karen still had a loyal circle, mostly older residents who valued her role in enforcing HOA rules and maintaining the neighborhood's polished image. They saw her as a gatekeeper of standards, even if her methods were harsh. These allies continued to back her, echoing her claims that Reggie's toes were unneighborly and disruptive. However, their support began to waver as Karen's behavior grew more erratic. Her insistence on parking in Reggie's driveway even after 2 toes, coupled with her public tirade, made her appear unreasonable, even to those who shared her obsession with rules. One of her staunchest supporters, a retiree who often seconded her at HOA meetings, privately admitted to another neighbor that Karen's actions were going too far. This crack in her base was significant, as it showed even her allies were tiring of her vendetta. The community's shift was also driven by a growing awareness of the racial undertones in Karen's behavior. Reggie had been careful not to explicitly call out prejudice, focusing instead on his property rights, but neighbors began to notice the disparity in how Karen treated him compared to others. Her comments during the confrontation, calling Reggie that kind of neighbor and implying he didn't belong, echoed in conversations. Mrs. Alvarez and others pointed out that Karen had never parked in white neighbors' driveways or targeted them with such relentless complaints. This realization prompted discomfort among some residents, who began questioning whether Karen's actions stemmed from bias. The young couple, who were active on social media, shared subtle posts about respecting neighbors' boundaries, which sparked discussions online and offline, further eroding Karen's influence. By now, Reggie's fight was becoming a symbol of resistance against unchecked entitlement. Neighbors began to rally, not just for him but for a community free from Karen's overreach. Small acts of support, shared stories, offers to testify against her complaints, and invitations to Reggie for coffee signaled a turning tide. The neighborhood was no longer just Karen's domain. It was starting to embrace Reggie as a member who deserved respect, setting the stage for a collective pushback against her tactics. Karen Mitchell's campaign against Reggie Carter had pushed Oakwood Estates to a breaking point. Her relentless parking in his driveway, followed by 2 toes and a barrage of petty HOA complaints, exposed her entitlement and eroded her influence. The second toe, coupled with her public outburst, had shifted the neighborhood's perception, turning many residents against her. Neighbors who once tolerated her overbearing control began to see her actions as not just unfair but vindictive, tinged with prejudice. As Reggie's quiet resolve contrasted with Karen's escalating aggression, the community rallied, taking collective action to dismantle her dominance. Karen's downfall was not a single event but a steady unraveling, driven by the neighborhood's growing refusal to enable her behavior and a newfound commitment to fairness. The HOA, long a tool for Karen's manipulations, became the first battleground for her decline. After her latest complaint, claiming Reggie's toes were hostile and disrupted community harmony, the HOA board launched a review. Reggie provided meticulous documentation, photos of Karen's SUV in his driveway, timestamps of her trespassing, ignored notes, and records of his attempts to resolve the issue peacefully. The board, led by a no-nonsense president tired of Karen's baseless filings, found no merit in her claims. The bylaws clearly supported Reggie's right to protect his property, and Karen's repeated violations were undeniable. For the first time, the HOA issued her a warning, citing her misuse of the complaint process. This rebuke was a public blow, signaling that her influence over the board was waning. Neighbors, emboldened by the HOA's stance, began to organize. Mrs. Alvarez, a respected figure in Oakwood Estates, spearheaded a quiet but effective pushback. She circulated a petition among residents, calling for the HOA to address Karen's pattern of harassment and enforce stricter guidelines against frivolous complaints. The petition gained traction quickly, with signatures from the young couple down the street, the middle-aged couple who had apologized to Reggie, and even a few of Karen's former allies who had grown weary of her tactics. The document didn't name Karen explicitly but referenced abusive behavior and misuse of authority, leaving no doubt about its target. By the time it reached the HOA, over 20 households, nearly half the neighborhood, had signed, a clear sign that Karen's grip on the community was slipping. Karen's social standing crumbled further as her past actions came under scrutiny. Neighbors shared stories of her bullying. The single mother pressured to repaint her house, the family forced to remove a basketball hoop, the retiree hounded over a flagpole's height. These accounts, once whispered, were now openly discussed, often with regret for not challenging her sooner. The young couple's social media posts about respecting boundaries gained likes and comments, amplifying the narrative that Karen's behavior was unacceptable. Even her remaining supporters grew quiet, unwilling to defend her after her public tirade against Reggie revealed her true colors. Her comments about him being that kind of neighbor lingered, prompting uneasy conversations about her possible racial bias. Residents who had stayed neutral began to distance themselves, unwilling to align with someone whose actions now seemed petty and prejudiced. Karen's attempts to regain control only hastened her downfall. She hosted another coffee gathering, hoping to rally her allies, but attendance was sparse. Those who showed up pressed her about the driveway dispute, questioning why she continued parking there despite the tows. Her evasive answers and insistence that Reggie was overreacting fell flat. One neighbor, a former supporter, pointedly asked why she felt entitled to Reggie's property, leaving her flustered. The meeting ended abruptly, with Karen retreating to her house, her influence visibly diminished. Meanwhile, the HOA board, under pressure from the petition, implemented new rules limiting complaint filings to verifiable issues, a direct response to Karen's abuse of the system. This change was celebrated by residents who had long felt targeted by her micromanagement. By now, Karen was isolated. Her SUV no longer appeared in Reggie's driveway, a small but significant victory. The neighborhood's collective action had forced her to back down, not out of remorse but because her power had evaporated. The petition, the HOA's warning, and the community's shift in sentiment left her with little room to maneuver. Her attempts to regain favor, offering to host a community event, were met with polite rejections. Karen's reign as Oakwood Estates' self-appointed gatekeeper was over, replaced by a growing sense of unity among neighbors who valued fairness over her brand of control. Reggie's stand had exposed her, and the community's response ensured her downfall, paving the way for a more inclusive neighborhood. Reggie Carter's stand against Karen Mitchell's entitlement transformed Oakwood Estates, marking the end of her reign as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer and ushering in a new era of unity. The second toe, Karen's public outburst, and the community's collective pushback through the HOA petition had dismantled her influence, exposing her actions as not only selfish but rooted in prejudice. As Karen's dominance faded, Reggie emerged as a quiet hero whose resolve inspired neighbors to reject division and embrace fairness. The resolution of their conflict was not just about reclaiming a driveway but about restoring a sense of community, proving that standing up for what's right could heal wounds and forge stronger bonds. The neighborhood's transformation, coupled with Karen's departure, left a lasting impact, offering a heartwarming testament to justice and solidarity. With Karen's influence broken, Oakwood Estates began to change. The HOA, now free from her constant complaints, adopted a more transparent approach, encouraging residents to voice concerns directly at meetings rather than through anonymous filings. The petition, signed by nearly half the neighborhood, had not only curbed Karen's tactics but also empowered residents to hold the board accountable. Neighbors who had once stayed silent, fearing Karen's wrath, now spoke up about community improvements, from better landscaping to inclusive events. Reggie's role in this shift was undeniable. His persistence, backed by meticulous documentation and a refusal to stoop to Karen's level, had shown the community what principled resistance could achieve. Residents began to see him not as a newcomer, but as a catalyst for positive change. Karen's retreat was swift and telling. After the HOA's warning and the petition's success, her SUV stopped appearing in Reggie's driveway. Her attempts to regain favor, like offering to host a community barbecue, were met with lukewarm responses. Neighbors, now openly critical of her past bullying, declined to attend, choosing instead to organize their own gatherings. Embarrassed and isolated, Karen put her house on the market a few months later. By spring, she and her husband moved away, their departure met with quiet relief. While no one celebrated openly, the absence of her silver SUV and her critical gaze lifted a weight from Oakwood Estates. Reggie's driveway remained his own, a small but symbolic victory that represented his right to belong. The neighborhood's newfound unity manifested in tangible ways. Mrs. Alvarez, the young couple, and other supporters began hosting block parties, inviting Reggie and others to join. These events, once rare due to Karen's oversight of approved activities, became a staple, with residents sharing food, music, and stories. Reggie, initially reserved after months of tension, found himself welcomed warmly. Neighbors thanked him for standing up to Karen, admitting they'd been too intimidated to challenge her before. The middle-aged couple across the street, who had once believed Karen's narrative, brought Reggie a homemade pie as an apology, confessing they'd misjudged him. These gestures, though small, rebuilt the sense of community Reggie had hoped for when he moved in. The racial undertones of Karen's behavior, once a subtle undercurrent, became a point of reflection for Oakwood Estates. Neighbors like Mrs. Alvarez openly discussed how Karen's treatment of Reggie differed from her interactions with white residents, prompting broader conversations about inclusion. The young couple, active on social media, posted about the importance of respecting all neighbors, sparking online support from others in the city. The HOA introduced a diversity initiative, hosting workshops to address unconscious bias, a move inspired by the community's desire to prevent another Karen. Reggie, while never explicitly framing his fight as racial, appreciated these efforts, feeling seen not just as a homeowner but as a black man who deserved equal respect. Reggie's quiet heroism left a lasting legacy. His driveway, once a battleground, became a symbol of his resilience. He continued his routine, working, walking Max, tending his garden, now with a sense of peace he'd fought for. Neighbors stopped by to chat, and he joined the HOA as a volunteer, helping shape a fairer community. The block parties grew, with kids playing, adults laughing, and a shared understanding that no one should dominate others through entitlement or prejudice. Oakwood Estates was no longer Karen's domain, but a place where fairness prevailed. The heartwarming resolution lay not just in Reggie's victory but in the community's transformation, proving that one person's stand against injustice could unite neighbors and inspire change, creating a home where everyone belonged. As Reggie Carter's story shows, standing up to entitlement can transform a community, turning division into unity and injustice into hope. His fight for his driveway wasn't just about property. It was about dignity, fairness, and the right to belong. Oakwood Estates became a stronger, more inclusive neighborhood because one man refused to back down. Now it's your turn to make a difference. Have you faced a Karen in your life or seen someone stand up for what's right? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've overcome challenges or supported your community. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring real-life stories that remind us of the power of justice and unity. Together, let's keep standing up, speaking out, and building communities where everyone is respected. See you in the next video.